news of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on a farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm. Spend a little more in the store for a tag in the back that says USA.
Welcome to American Heartland. I am your host, Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy Saturday to join us on this show where every week we review the news and we uphold values that are never, ever, ever going to die. Well, the President of the United States told us that under no conditions was he going to be sending boots on the ground to Iraq. The situation there is deteriorating by the minute. There is ISIS now, this brutal militant army taking large swaths of Iraqi territory. And as they move forward, their actions are nothing short of harrowing. They are, in the words of Sean Hannity, they're beheading their way to Baghdad. That's literally what they're doing. Every night now we see on the news images that are terrifying. They are waving black flags. They are fanatics. They are brutal. In all these images, a couple of things really surprise me. One is that we can now see clearly how menacing they are and how quickly and easily the Iraqi army folded in the wake of this advancing troop. I don't think we yet fully understand why the Iraqi security forces that we trained collapsed so quickly. But you know what's even more surprising is that so many times you see these soldiers who are captured, they're clearly going to be slaughtered. And even at the moment where they're being led to the slaughter, they don't seem to be putting up a fight. Even then, no resistance, just silence and waiting for the gun to penetrate their head, the bullet to penetrate their head. These images are catastrophic for this country, not just for Iraq, but for our nation too. Because over 4,500 brave men and women lost their lives there, and there were thousands of casualties too. And so many now are asking the question, what was it all for? Why did we lose our brothers, our sisters? Why did we lose our life, our limbs, our psychological health? What was it all for? Well, it's obvious that our president is very wishy-washy on foreign policy. When the crisis broke out, he said, after a couple of rounds of golf, of course, when he could think clearly, that under no conditions, under no circumstances was he going to send boots on the ground. But that was then, and this is now. He has reversed himself dramatically once again. This week at a press conference, he said that 275 American troops will be sent to Iraq, and they are going to go to protect the American embassy in Baghdad. So literally a couple of days after he said no American troops are going, he changed his mind, and suddenly, shazam, 275 troops are going, and they're going to be joining a couple of other small contingents of American troops that are already there. So, what does all of this mean? To me, it sounds like when you have soldiers in uniform with guns, That is troops on the ground, Mr. President. What's really disturbing here, it doesn't matter how he tries to define or explain away what he's doing now. What's disturbing is these dramatic changes in policy that come in such quick succession. Do you remember when he was dealing with Syria? Under no conditions was this red line of the use of chemical weapons to be drawn. And suddenly when that bluff was called, he said, no, I never drew that red line. The world drew the red line. A total reversal of what he previously said. And this week, we saw the very same things. Same thing happened. No troops are going to be deployed. Absolutely not. We're reviewing all military options. Everything is on the table, but no troops. And suddenly, Shazam, we are sending troops. And how many are we sending? Well, 275. There's already a contingent of about 100 there. There's another 100 that will be on standby in another country. And guess what? We're looking at also sending another 100 special forces in there. What a colossal mess. And what a nincompoop. On this show, I am now going to call the President of the United States our nincompoop in chief. He is a nincompoop. There's just really no other appropriate word. And if you look at him very carefully, he looks like a nincompoop. This is somebody who doesn't understand that when you're dealing with the rest of the world, and these are enemies that have vowed to extinguish us, the great Satan, from the face of the earth, whatever policy you take, there's one cardinal rule that you cannot violate, is that you must be consistent. If you're going to be the president of peace, be the president of peace. If you're going to be the president of war, be the president of war. But don't be the president of peace one day and the president of war the other day. Don't be the president of I'm withdrawing all forces one day, I'm returning forces the other day. I'm drawing a red line one day, I'm canceling that red line the other day. Obamacare will go into law, sorry, except for these provisions that I waive with my executive authority. Oopsie. What this tells the rest of the world is very simple. He does not know what he is doing, and it's now open season on any and all American interests. What's very, very disturbing too is you have to think about this. As now we are beginning to turn our attention to Iraq, seeing images that we previously thought we would not see. We thought this was done. We thought we had settled this issue in Iraq. As we turn our attention, what else to Iraq? What else do you think is going on in the rest of the world? What is Putin thinking? Oh, interesting. A distraction. And perhaps my second opportunity to move forward in eastern Ukraine. And what is every single one of our enemies thinking? Not just in Iraq, not just in Russia. There are now so many parts of the world that are blowing up. American forces are spread thin. The American public is war-weary. This president doesn't know what he is doing, and now is our chance to seize the advantage. So one foreign policy mess-up begets another, and another, and another. And that is why it is Commander-in-Chief Rule 101 that you must always project strength. You see, this president really believes that if he presents America as one nation among equals, that there's some kind of moral law in the universe that kicks in. And suddenly, a true moral respect for America emerges and we have peace. We know that that is a liberal delusion. That's not what happens. The minute that America withdraws, that power vacuum is filled up with the most atrocious barbarians you will ever see. And in fact, that is what ISIS is. These are barbarians. And they are going to first wreak havoc in Iraq and then beyond. They're doing it in Syria, now Iraq, and who knows how far they will go. Now you have this whole group of people emerging all over the airwaves and on national media saying, this is just a sectarian war between two Muslim factions, and the best thing that we can do is to just stay out of it and mind our own business. That is really foolish, and I'll tell you why. We're not just talking about a civil war where the objective of one faction is to crush, eliminate, dominate the other faction, declare victory in a state, and then rule that state. That's the definition of a civil war that we should stay out of. But what's going on here between the Shia and the Sunni, that is a battle akin to Stalin and Trotsky. Yes, an internal division with a particular ideology that seeks global domination, which means this: it's not merely a civil war that you can say, oh, it doesn't matter what happens there because we can just leave it there within those borders. That's not what this conflict is about. This is a conflict that is really about which section of the Muslim creed is going to dominate the other to ultimately achieve global hegemony. That's the problem. And this is a problem that George Bush and Dick Cheney grasped. Whatever you might say about the strengths and weaknesses of their foreign policy, they understood the enemy. Our president, so many liberals, and unfortunately, even today, from what I'm hearing, so many conservatives don't grasp who we are up against and what their ultimate objectives are. So this is not just a sectarian religious war. This is a fight between terrorists who, once they achieve one goal of domination, will progress to assault their neighbors, and ultimately they're coming for us. So the terror that you see being unleashed in a distant part of the world, if we don't take a strong stand against that, that terror is coming here. And the nincompoop in chief has made one blunder after the other, withdrawing way too soon, for one thing. And when he was asked about it at the press conference that he gave this week, he was asked, well, do you regret that? And this is what the nincompoop in chief had to say. Roll it.
We have.
Just very quickly, do you wish you had left a residual force in Iraq? Any regrets about that decision in 2011?
Well, keep in mind, that wasn't a decision made by me. That was a decision made by the Iraqi government. We offered a modest residual force to help continue to train and advise Iraqi security forces. We had a core requirement, which we require in any situation where we have U.S. troops overseas, and that is that they are provided immunity at the since they are being invited by the sovereign government there, so that if, for example, they end up acting in self-defense, if they are attacked and find themselves in a tough situation, that they're not somehow hauled before a court. That's a core requirement that we have for U.S. troop presence anywhere. The Iraqi government and Prime Minister Maliki declined to provide us that immunity. And so I think it is important, though, to recognize that despite that decision, that we have continued to provide them with very intensive advice and support, and have continued throughout this process over the last 5 years to not only offer them our assistance militarily, but we've also continued to urge the kinds of political compromises that we think are ultimately necessary in order for them to have a functioning multi-sectarian democracy inside the country. Juliet.
So, in a nutshell, the president is saying it's Malachi's fault that we withdrew far too soon. Listen, sir, we created that state, and it was up to us to dictate our terms to him. So that is a cockamamie excuse. What we really know is that this president is much more interested in all the perks and privileges of being commander-in-chief than the actual tough job of being commander-in-chief. Go ahead, Mr. President. Why don't you enjoy another round of golf while the world burns?
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on a farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm. Spend a little more in the store for a tag. In the back it says USA.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. Thank you for joining us today. Every week on this show, we review the news, and even more important than that, we uphold values that are never, ever, ever going to die. And the cardinal value that we uphold is an adherence to the Constitution of the United States of America. And that is why this week it is with a heavy heart, but a determined heart, that I begin this broadcast saying that we must impeach President Barack Hussein Obama. He is a threat to our national security. I want everyone out there to listen very carefully. The President of the United States must be impeached. What has transpired over the last week is nothing short of treason. He has betrayed us in the worst way that a president can betray the American people. The president has released 5 heinous men from captivity. They are commanders who have committed unspeakable crimes. Some are wanted as war criminals by the International Criminal Court. These men are dangerous. They have been classified as high risk again and again and again by those who reviewed their file. Our president has released them. And it doesn't matter why or how. It doesn't matter that he released them in a so-called exchange to get an American soldier back. That is an irrelevant point. What is most important is that by releasing these men, our very own president is working against us. He is threatening our security. And there is no greater breach of trust that could have befallen us. There is no greater act of disloyalty that he could have committed. When I heard this, I could not believe what I was hearing. And I say this as a historian who has spent over 10 years literally in a library to obtain a doctoral degree in history, where I immersed myself in a knowledge of the past. And yet the present, what I heard breaking on the news on Sunday morning, was unprecedented in my view, unbelievable, stupefying, outrageous, but more than all of that, the president has crossed a Rubicon from which he can never ever return, because he has demonstrated to all of us now, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that he must be removed. For the last few years, we have been talking about one scandal after the other. And each of these are alarming and disturbing and outrageous, culminating most recently in the Veterans Affairs scandal. The head of that division, Eric Shinseki, recently resigned. He was pushed out. And I was going to begin a show thinking that I was going to talk about how the commander-in-chief should resign based on the Veterans Affairs scandal. We haven't even begun to explore the depths of deplorable conduct in that scandal. And that follows Benghazi and the IRS and Navy SEAL Team 6 and the scandal of the surveillance state. One after the other, almost every single day in the last couple of months, there has been bad news, disturbing news, and worst of all, news that some part of our republic is being assaulted, some part of our republic is being denigrated, some part of our republic is being destroyed. Most recently, the president has embarked on a series of executive actions, arbitrarily deciding what laws he will enforce and what laws he will ignore. When it came to the disastrous rollout of Obamacare, he, by fiat, decided what provisions he would keep and what he would ignore. Essentially, telling Congress, you are irrelevant. When it comes to the discussion of illegal immigrants, he has used his executive authority to do what he deems best, telling Congress, you are irrelevant. And now, once again, in an unforgivable act, he has defied a very statement that he signed, whereby he was supposed to notify Congress 30 days before any detainee from Guantanamo was to be released or transferred or given up or whatever. He defied that. And he released these 5 men. We can talk and talk and talk about whether or not we should impeach him now, whether or not we should wait for after we take over the midterm, if we do succeed in reclaiming the Senate. We can talk about all that. But I am urgently asking all of you to join me in a determined, unrelenting, persistent crusade to impeach this man from office. And I tell you, I do not believe that we have the luxury of time any longer. I do not believe that we can wait. I am that alarmed. I am that concerned about the actions that he is taking. What he did by releasing our enemies, it's all smoke and mirrors as to why he did it. But it is as though, and I want you to imagine this, can you imagine if we had Osama bin Laden in our possession and then we released him. Would it matter what the reason is? It doesn't matter. It's like releasing a nuclear bomb against us. Those 5 men are like a ticking time bomb that is going to be dropped upon all of us. And if he can do this, he's going to do worse. And that is why on this broadcast today, I am deeply alarmed. I fear what he will do next. I fear for all of us because it is patently clear that he is not working for us. He is not working in our best interest. Many times I am asked in all the interviews I do across this country, do you think that there's some kind of plot that he's been cooking? Do you think he's deliberately malicious? Or do you think he's simply incompetent? You know what? At this point, even that question is now irrelevant. It doesn't matter if he's incompetent, insane, stupid, malicious, arrogant, disengaged. It doesn't matter. He's dangerous. And he has got to go. And I do not think that we can wait. That is how concerned I am. Because he has shown that he has no regard for Congress, which means he has no regard for the American people. He has no regard for the history of this country, for its traditions, for its customs. And clearly, he has no regard for the well-being of the American people. Because there is no way to justify the release of 5 sworn enemies of the United States. He must be impeached, and we have to begin that campaign now. Senator Lindsey Graham has come out and said, well, if he releases another detainee from Guantanamo, then he's going to be impeached. What's the difference between releasing another one and the ones that he's just done? The Republicans are alarmed. Even some Democrats are alarmed. And the chatter, the real chatter in this country right now, the conversations that people are having on the phone, not what the mainstream media is reporting, but what I'm talking about to my fellow journalist friends, to my sources, what I'm talking about to my family members, and what I'm hearing everywhere, he is a danger to us. And unless we act quickly, something terrible will happen to this great land. He has shown us that he is not telling us the truth. And a combination of willful deceit, constant disregard for the laws of this land, on top of an actual dangerous act like what he just did, means that this is beyond political gamesmanship. This is beyond right now. What we are confronting right now is beyond winning or losing elections. It's even beyond, are we going to save our constitutional republic? My fellow Americans, I am so alarmed at the treachery in the Oval Office. I believe that we are all literally, physically in danger because he is obviously collaborating with America's worst, most determined, most vicious, and heinous enemies. And unless we take action quickly, before we know it, it may be too late. And therefore, President Barack Hussein Obama, must unequivocally, without doubt, without question, be impeached by the American people.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Like a wagon wheel, rock me, mama, any way you feel. Hey, mama, rock me.
Welcome back to American Heartland. This is Dr. Grace discussing the big mama making news this week. Once again, that is Madam Hillary Clinton. I call her Cranky Clinton or the Slippery Clinton. And this week I thought of another one, the Cackling Clinton, because her laugh is that of a cackling crow. The mutant that she is, she doesn't even laugh like a human being. Do you notice that when she looks out into the camera when she's being interviewed, she's got these big gaping eyes. They open very wide and they seem almost like blank. And then she's got this frozen smile on her face at all times. Even when she's discussing the most gruesome events, she just like smiles. And by smiling, you know what she hopes? She hopes that maybe, just maybe, she'll be likable enough. Well, this book tour that she's on, it's not faring very well. The book sales are not very high. And she's on a media blitz, which, according to all the latest reports, the viewership on most of the shows that she's on is not very high. Even when she appeared on Fox News, it was not the ratings winner that they thought it was going to be. So it looks like the Cackling Clinton has lost her allure. She's not getting the response that she thought she was going to get. And I think Democrats are going to be looking at this very closely, scratching their heads, asking themselves, how quickly should we jump in before we careen into a disaster? Well, the problem with Hillary Clinton, apart from her complete inability to connect with the American people, her coldness, her inability to speak plainly and honestly, the real problem is that her foreign policy is a failure. The Obama-Clinton foreign policy is imploding right before our eyes, as we've been discussing for the last two segments, and she's not going to be able to escape that legacy. One of the problems is that she is perceived as part of the architect of that legacy. She is, if you can say that Rove was the architect of the Bush years, well, Hillary Clinton is definitely going to be perceived as the architect in foreign policy of the Obama presidency. Yes, he clipped her wings, to some extent, but she went along with it. She was part of the reset. She was part of the soft power approach. She was part of the leading from behind approach. And on many interviews, she continues to defend that foreign policy. So she's not even distancing herself to the extent that she really needs to if she wants to have any chance of succeeding in the future. I think that Ted Cruz this week nailed it when he analyzed the Obama-Clinton foreign policy. This is what's really wrong with it.
But let me just make this point. I know neither you or I want to have a whole interview about Benghazi, but Al-Qaeda itself is a complicated term, right? Maybe they took the words out because that would imply direction straight from Al-Qaeda headquarters on the Pakistan-Afghanistan border, right? As opposed to a group who was inspired by it. There were reasons to take those terms out that made complete sense.
Aaron, with respect, no, they didn't. Because they didn't just take out Al-Qaeda. They took out any reference to radical Islamic terrorism. And the most consistent error of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy is a failure to understand the nature of the people we're dealing with, of our enemies. It is striking that neither President Obama nor Hillary Clinton in this discussion tonight are willing to utter the words radical Islamic terrorism. They do not understand the radical religious extremism of individuals committed to jihad who have pledged to murder Americans. And that leads them to keep making the mistakes over and over and over again, whether it is releasing 5 senior Taliban terrorists without understanding that these individuals will likely return to active warfare against the United States, whether it is in the case of Iraq, not understanding the threat posed by ISIS. I'll tell you a great question we ought to be asking right now is whether the Obama administration has armed ISIS, these radical Islamic terrorists, whether they have armed them in Syria, because we know they're arming some of the rebels.
Well, you know, Mr. Cruz, just on that latter point, we know for a fact that ISIS is taking the armaments that we had given to the Iraqi army. So, in a sense, that's a colossal failure right there if you just want to analyze armaments that are falling into the wrong hands. But getting to the larger point about Obama Clinton not understanding the nature of the enemy, that is 100% right. You know that reporter, that dumb reporter that's asking the question, she's like, oh, Al-Qaeda, that's a complicated term. What's the difference between core Al-Qaeda and those who are inspired by Al-Qaeda? Listen, you moron. They are jihadists who want to kill you. It's not complicated. And we're talking about radical Islam, as Senator Cruz has rightfully said. It's not that complicated. So when they use these words like, you got to distinguish between the core and the offshoots, and it's all so complicated, what they're really trying to say is they don't know what they're doing and that they are completely incapable of leading this country in a straightforward fight against our determined enemies. The problem, though, is that in so many cases, even the so-called conservative media isn't blowing holes in their foreign policy right when they have a golden opportunity. This week, Bret Baier and Greta Van Susteren, they had the opportunity to interview Hillary Clinton. She's on her book tour, Hard Choices. And this was a much vaunted interview. We expected that at least Bret Baier, and this is an individual, by the way, who generally I think very well of, I expected that he was going to ask her some tough questions because he has been very, very skillful in his reporting on Benghazi. He's also been very dogged in his reporting. And in fact, you'll remember that just last week, it was Bret Baier who grabbed that headline-making interview about the State Department phones that were seized that very night by the terrorists, and that he provided the evidence, the incontrovertible evidence that everybody right away knew that Al-Qaeda or Ansar al-Sharia, which is an Al-Qaeda offshoot, had conducted those terrorist attacks. So he's really been on top of this. And yet, stunningly, when he had Hillary Clinton right in front of him, he suddenly turned into a mealy-mouthed, brain-dead reporter. It looks like when somebody interviews a mutant, they become mutant-like themselves. Listen to this.
Madam Secretary, in your testimony before the Senate on Benghazi in January 2013, you stated this, quote, I certainly did not know of any reports that contradicted the intelligence community talking points at the time that Ambassador Rice went on the TV shows, the Sunday shows. Do you stand by that statement?
I do, Brett, and I wrote about this at length in my book, a whole chapter on the attack on Benghazi. This was the fog of war. You know, my own assessment careened from, you know, the video had something to do with it, the video had nothing to do with it. It may have affected some people, it didn't affect other people. And I think the conclusion to draw, because we were not just monitoring what was happening in Benghazi once it began to unfold, but remember we had a very dangerous assault on our embassy in Cairo that same day, which was clearly linked to that video. So I was trying to make sense of it. And, you know, I think that the investigations that have been carried out basically conclude we can't say that everybody was influenced and we can't say everybody wasn't. But what the intelligence community said was spontaneous protests, and that is what, at the time, they thought.
Well, now Bret Baier had an opportunity to really go after her. First of all, the phrase fog of war. What fog of war? Every single cable that was coming from the ground stated very clearly that this was a terrorist strike. We have all that evidence. We know that the State Department phones provided the evidence as well. There was no fog of war. There was complete clarity during this attack. So that's nonsense, and he should have followed up strong and fast on that. In addition, she mentioned Cairo, and she said, oh, in Cairo, the video was important, and that was such a feature of the protests there. He should have followed up by saying, excuse me, Madam Secretary, in Cairo, what you had that day was an Al-Qaeda love fest. That's what that was. It was a rally in defense of Al-Qaeda. It wasn't even, a spontaneous protest. It was a deliberate, planned rally, just like the Benghazi attack was a deliberately planned attack. And then she goes on about, the investigations have also presented various and conflicting evidence. When they're trying to say that things are complicated and conflicting, and some people may have been influenced and others not, that they are lying right through their teeth, because the latest ongoing in Benghazi is we now are so alarmed by the deception that was put out by the Obama administration and Hillary herself that there's a select committee looking into this. So I think that Bret Baier could have come after her on so many different fronts, and he didn't. He didn't attack her. He didn't get any new information. He didn't move the needle on this story forward at all. Do you know what he came across as? Just a patsy. Another patsy who allowed her to promote her book. He came across as a tool, a little poodle of Hillary Clinton. And he goes on to ask more puff questions that get puff answers.
Either before or after that, at 10:07, you put out this press release saying, quote, I condemn in the strongest terms the attack on our mission in Benghazi today. Some have sought to justify this vicious behavior as a response to inflammatory material posted on the internet. The United States deplores any intentional effort to denigrate the religious beliefs of others. Our commitment to religious tolerance goes back to the very beginning of our nation, but let me be clear, there is never any justification for violent acts of this kind. Did you talk about the video with President Obama?
I don't know that I talked about it with him at that conversation. We had since on numerous occasions, because part of what we were trying to sort out is what caused this. I mean, I had a very clear sense of priorities. Protect our people, get them to safety, make sure that other attacks or threatened attacks at other embassies or other American posts are not going to happen. We need to get much more support from the governments of the countries where we are posting our people. And let's learn what happened so that we can try to prevent it in real time. So I know that there is a lot of questions, and I know you and your viewers have a lot of questions. And I would recommend that people read the unclassified version of the Accountability Review Board, which you can get off the State Department website. Read what congressional committees have already put out, because you will get the best information we currently have.
Now, here again, there were so many openings. First of all, that State Department note that he read was posted at 10:07. And Jay Carney had said clearly in a press conference that the Secretary of State had spoken to the president at around 10 o'clock. In follow-up questions, he asked him, what came first, the posting or your conversation with the president? And she said that the posting came first. That was an outright lie. They talked first, they concocted a story, and then you had the posting. So those are matters of fact that have been clearly ascertained, and he didn't follow up on that. In addition, he didn't ask her any questions about the testimony of CIA Director Mike Morell, who said, yes, there was this whole issue of the spontaneous protests that were put in the talking points by the Washington team. We ignored the reports on the ground, but I had nothing to do with the insertion of the YouTube clip information. Where did that come from? He doesn't follow up on that. The intelligence community never mentioned this YouTube clip, Madam Secretary. So where did it come from? You say you spoke about it with the president afterwards. What was the context of that conversation? He didn't press on that either. In addition, she goes on about, our focus is to try to prevent this from never happening again. One of the obvious questions is, We interviewed, Brett should have said, everybody knows this, a retired air major, has been interviewed who came forward saying that had they been sent, they would have been able to rescue at least 2 of the 4. So I would have just said to her, excuse me, Madam Secretary, you're talking about trying to prevent this in the future. What about what you could have done to save lives then, that night? And there's another point. Why weren't you on high alert? It was 9/11, for crying out loud. Everybody knows that an embassy, would have been a likely target. That's just basic common sense. Why were you not better prepared? And then he should have pressed and pressed and pressed on the cables that were sent by the ambassador, begging for security. And he should have asked, why did you not take it into your own hands? None of the answers that you have provided to the press makes any sense. Now, recently, the Wall Street Journal has come out with an absolutely brilliant analysis. And it is this. This is this key information, which I hope that the Republicans use and say over and over again until, the next election, which is once our embassy was bombed in 1998, there was a review panel that was conducted there. And one of the key questions they asked is this: who is responsible for securing our embassies? Who has the direct authority to determine the level of security in our compounds abroad? Because one of the problems in 1998 was when they looked at the information, they were like, oh, I don't know. It's not my department. Is it your department? Oh, no, it's not mine. And they decided back then, in order to ensure that this never happens again, that it is clearly in the purview of the Secretary of State. And if the Secretary of State deems that the security of a particular embassy is not in her purview, then she must sign a waiver. So either the Secretary of State failed completely to oversee the embassies, or she signed a waiver. It's one or the other. She can't have it any other way. And Brett Baier should have been armed with the evidence, and he should have been exposing her as a liar and as an incompetent. Instead, he and Greta Van Susteren almost looked like 2 fans at Barnes & Noble with their jaws dropping open. Oh, Hillary, sign my book, sign my book. We go brain dead when we see you. So it looks to me, when in the presence of a mutant, be very careful. Your brain may be overtaken, and suddenly it goes all mushy, and you can't even remember the facts that you have reported on, the breaking news you have reported on, the people you have interviewed. Because that's what happened with Brain Dead. He had a lobotomy right before our eyes. That was Brett Baier, but he wasn't really there. So truly, a really disappointing interview. But it doesn't surprise me. And I'll tell you why it doesn't surprise me. Because one thing I learned in all my years working at the Washington Times, it was said overtly and covertly. You cannot attack a leading figure too forcefully when they're right in front of you. You know why? Because they will never come back. And then you don't have access. Well, I'm sorry. I expected better from Brett Baier. I don't care if you have access or you don't have access. I want you to be as tough when you have this person in front of you as you are every other time you report on a story. Instead, Brett Baier and Fox News dropped the ball when they had a golden opportunity to expose the cackling Clinton for the crazy, incompetent mutant that she is.
Everything will be alright if I can kiss you tonight.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace. The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
A-M-O-R-O-U-S, yeah. G-L-A-M-O-R-O-U-S. We flying first class.
Welcome back to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. Well, you know, this week Hillary Clinton is trying to tell us all that she was actually dead broke after she left the White House, not leading the glamorous life of a first lady and a president with multi-million-dollar mansions and multi-million-dollar book deals on the table. No, no, no. Listen, cranky Hillary is making one gaffe after the other. She's released her book, Hard Choices, and everyone is saying this book is a snore. A commentator on CNN, Anna Navarro, called it 50 Shades of Boring, quote unquote. The New Republic has said it's dullness and lack of critical energy. Somebody on Politico's website called it a newsless snore. So these are all the adjectives and words that are being used to describe her memo and in a memoir. And in addition to that, she's giving interviews where she is making mistakes, unforced errors. The first is this comment that she and Bill were actually dead broke after they left the White House. They had to work really, really hard, and they understand the pain of the American people. She has been blown to smithereens, left, right, and center on this comment, and rightfully so, because evidently she is part of an elite. She has rubbed shoulders with the wealthy for years, and she has lived in the lap of luxury for years, even well before she and Bill left the White House and really cashed in. So what this gaffe has done, it has highlighted just how wealthy she and Bill really, really are. She leads the glamorous life, and for her to try to convey this sense that she understands the pain of the working man and woman, the pain of the middle class, it is preposterous, and she should stop doing it immediately. What's important here is I've been saying for months and months that Hillary Clinton is a very weak candidate. You know when Hillary's poll numbers go up? It's when she doesn't speak too much. That's when her poll numbers soar. Remember that when she was the victim in the Monica Lewinsky affair scandal that engulfed Bill Clinton's presidency, her poll numbers soared shortly thereafter. She didn't say very much. She was just presented as the victim. Well, during the years that she was Secretary of State and she just traveled from place to place and she didn't open her mouth too much, her poll numbers soared. But what I know, and what every astute political commentator will tell you, is that when Hillary Clinton opens her mouth, she makes a lot of mistakes. And that 2008 campaign, when she ran against Barack Obama, who was really a novice, it wasn't just that he was a brilliant orator. It was also that she was a lousy candidate. She was horrible. And so here you have her now this week making many mistakes. And it's not just that comment. She is now being grilled on Benghazi. And she has said that, yes, if she could turn back the clock, that is one of her regrets. And she would obviously wish that it hadn't happened. And she's been asked, well, what exactly would you have done differently? And here is where she's slipping up. She has said over and over again that she takes full responsibility for what happened that night. And yet, when you ask her to explain, well, wait a minute, tell us what you mean by you take full responsibility and what would you have done differently? This is the kind of thing that she says. Roll it, Brittany.
Is there anything you personally should have been doing to make it safer in Benghazi?
Well, what I did was give very direct instructions that the people who have the expertise and experience in security apply it. Well, that is personal, though, Diane. I'm not equipped to sit and look at blueprints to determine where the blast walls need to be or where the reinforcements need to be. That's why we hire people who have that expertise.
You are supposed to supervise the security of every American outpost. And what does that mean exactly? What it means is when you're getting cables from your ambassador saying, help, 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 We need more security here. You, as the Secretary of State, you convene the security team, you ask a lot of questions, then you pick up the phone and you call Ambassador Chris Stevens and you say, sir, this is what the security team is telling me. This is what you're telling me. Oh, there's a discrepancy here. I, as the leader of this department, have to ensure that this discrepancy is rectified. That's what leadership is. You don't simply abandon the job to the so-called experts, because you are supposed to be the one that has the vision overseeing multiple components of a very complicated job. That's what it is to be Secretary of State. So it's preposterous to sit there and say that we actually wanted you to stare at various walls and determine yourself whether the security situation was adequate. What we want you to do is make sure that when you're getting cables from people saying, people that are representing the United States of America in a dangerous place, help, there isn't sufficient security here, I'm in peril, you get proactive and you make sure that the security meets the standards of the people that are calling for help. This isn't rocket science. But what do we see here? She's a whiner. Do you take responsibility for what happened, or do you not take responsibility? And if you take responsibility, part of that is saying, this, in retrospect, is what I would have done differently. And I can tell you this. Nowadays, I happen to be giving a tremendous amount of counsel. I don't know why it is, but this last couple of weeks, people on the workforce, I have one friend and someone else who's very dear to me, calling me, asking me a lot of different kinds of questions about advice on the workplace. And based on my years on the workplace, I'm able to give that advice. And when I speak about my years in the workplace, I often say, I did this, but I was wrong. And the reason I was wrong is X, Y, and Z. And if I could do it again, I would do this. So I have an alternative vision of what I would have done based on the mistakes that I made. That's growth. That's taking responsibility for an error. And you know, the American people are very understanding, and they're also very forgiving. We know that not everything can go right at all times, and that great tragedies happen, and that even with the best of intentions, there are oversights and mistakes. Why not fess up? Why not open up? Instead, she is making a huge mistake. I know the media went on and on about this comment that she's dead broke, and I did allude to it initially to begin the segment. But for me, what is an even bigger mistake, because this story is not going to go away, is her answers on Benghazi. They're weak. And they tell us, if this is what you call taking responsibility as Secretary of State, well, what kind of confidence are we supposed to have in you if you seek the highest office in the land? You are showing that you don't understand what leadership is. You don't understand acknowledging a mistake and rectifying it. And you know what that sounds like? That sounds too much like Barack Obama, who can't fix a mistake. You know, I got to give credit to somebody like Bill Clinton, her husband. He's much better at something like this. Veering course, acknowledging that you're on the wrong path, and finding a way to reach out to the American people by changing what you're doing if the American people are saying they don't like it. That's what he did after he lost a key midterm election during his presidency. He veered course. And he did so by acknowledging what the American people wanted him to do. But this obstinance that you're seeing with Clinton and with Barack Obama, this doesn't work. We don't like it. It's inhuman. Remember I told you that I call people in Washington, D.C. mutants? This is the kind of talk that mutants are capable of. They don't speak like human beings. That doesn't sound like a human answer. You know what we would have really liked to hear from her? You know, Hillary, when Benghazi was going on, what were you saying to Bill Clinton? What were you saying to your daughter? What were you saying to your mother? What were you really saying to the people that you confide in? Were you saying something like, oh my God, I messed up. I was focusing on China. I don't know what she was focusing on. I was focusing on some other part of the world, and this just slipped under the radar. What's the truth? Everybody makes mistakes. We're not all perfect. We're not infallible. And obviously when it happened, you acknowledged that you had overlooked something, and you made comments that were obviously genuine. Probably you did that in private, but why aren't you willing to open up? You see, this is her problem. Remember, she's a wooden candidate, and she is generally dislikable. If you take away she's the victim, if you take away she's first lady, if you just look at her, Hillary Clinton, how many of you like her? How many of you say, you know, she's the kind of person I'd love to hang out with on a Friday night? Very few, even the Democrats who support her. Because she doesn't let you see who she really is. In fact, at this point, we don't know who she really is because she's so shifty. They called her husband Slick Bill. She's Slippery Hillary. She's always a slipping and a sliding. And that's why Barack Obama was able to defeat her in 2008, because he represented the idealistic wing of the Democratic Party, and she came across as the opportunistic pragmatist who doesn't really stand for anything except winning the next election. The American people are sick of that. They're sick of that on the left, and they're sick of that on the right. And that is a bigger mistake that she made during the Diane Sawyer interview than the gaffe about having been dead broke. You know, she went on to say that one of the things she learned about her mother is to be resilient. And here, too, this is going to be a tough sell to the American people. Do we really think that Hillary Clinton is resilient? Well, part of it, part of her life story is one of resilience. I mean, obviously, she endured a tremendous humiliation as First Lady, and yet she came back. She became a senator. She became Secretary of State. She's endured writing a book that is apparently selling well based on the crowds. So there is some resilience to her. But many women look at her and say, you know, having put up with Bill Clinton and all those repeated affairs, are you truly a resilient woman, or are you more like a doormat? How many times does a man have to humiliate you, cheat on you, attack your very womanhood by his actions, and then do so publicly before you truly stand up for yourself? So I don't know how far this she's a resilient leader, I don't know how far that's going to go. Because when you look at her actions in her own marriage, that doesn't seem like resilience. That seems like weakness, not strength. I can tell you, I've been on the phone with many, many girlfriends where I'm saying, for crying out loud, stand up for yourself and leave the bastard. And at the moment where my friend does, or one of my sisters does, I say, good for you. You're showing strength. You're drawing the line. You're saying, I'm not a doormat. I'm not accepting to be mistreated. So again, this whole thing, her mother taught her to be resilient. I don't think that card's going to work either. Then you know what else she said during the Diane Sawyer interview? That during the 2008 campaign, there was so much sexism. There was so much talk about her hair. There was so much talk about her suit. There were comments made that were clearly sexist, and the implication, perhaps she didn't win because the public is sexist. And again, she's imitating Barack Obama. He's used the race card to his advantage. She thinks she's going to be able to use the sexist card to her advantage. But I'm telling you, it won't work. It won't work because it's not like we look at you and say, you're obviously clearly such a talented woman. You're obviously clearly so likable, so honest, so forthright. So what else could it be? Maybe it would work if your record was that stellar. Maybe it would work if you were a Margaret Thatcher, say, who truly built up her career herself, not rode her husband's coattails, truly had a lot of charm and grace, authenticity, and talent. And if she wasn't elected, we might say, well, we got to look at some other factor. But no, we don't have to look that far. It's you. It's what you say and what you don't say. and the mutant-like look on your face when you speak. Your inability to connect. She couldn't connect with the people. She only won the primary in New Hampshire when she showed some tears because obviously her team was telling her, you can't connect. So it has nothing to do with whether or not Hillary Clinton was the subject or the victim of sexism during the 2008 campaign. And I really hope she doesn't go down that road. What's really going on is that slippery Hillary is deceitful. She can't be trusted. And when the American people see her, they see nothing other than Washington, D.C., politics as usual, a woman without principle, and a woman who lost her soul. You're listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at WorldTribune.com, saying, Hillary, you cannot pick up a 3 a.m. call.
It's 3 a.m., I must be lonely. She says, baby, well, I can't help but be scared of it all sometimes. The rain's gonna wash away, I believe it.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.